I'm going to talk for about 30-40 minutes, roughly, give or take, about my experiences in prison and in Israel. And then we should have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them my way, and I think Jeff is going to MC that part when we get to that part. Thank you again for inviting me here, the second talk of the Agape Latte series. I'm really touched and privileged to be part of this. I have a hard time convincing people that I'm old enough to be a professor just to begin with. So to be invited to this is really an honor. I have a really simple theme for today. And the theme is to venture outside of your comfort zone and try things that are unfamiliar to you. The only way we truly grow in life is to stretch ourselves and to try new experiences. I have to tell you that as much as I have to tell myself. As a child, even though I'm the oldest child in my family, my mom was always prodding me and trying to get me to do different things because I liked the comfortable and the safe and knowing what was familiar. And so I want to challenge you today to think about that. How many of you here are natives of the St. Louis area? All right, quite a few of you. I am too. I grew up in South City, just a few miles south of here. This is my third time living in St. Louis, so I keep coming back. I love St. Louis. Again, familiar. It's known. It's where my family is, of course, and definitely Stanley lives here now. But I think I've also benefited from all the times I've gotten out. So I want to encourage you, if you're that kind of person who likes the familiar, you don't have to be a thrill seeker or a daredevil, but get out of your comfort zone, try things. I'm going to talk about going to prison and being in a war zone when I was in Israel. Going to prison. So I went to prison about maybe 2 years ago. Some of you have heard of SLU's prison program. Anybody here heard of the SLU prison program in some way? Okay, a handful of you. At the end of the talk, I'll encourage you to find out more about some of the things I experienced, including the prison program. But in a nutshell, we started a prison program for prisoners in a maximum security prison in Bonne, Terre, Missouri. So Bonne, Terre is about an hour south of here, kind of close to Farmington. I think it's a great program. When I first heard that my colleague was starting this program, I thought, good for you. Then he asked me if I'd like to be a part of it. And I thought, I'm a skinny white guy. They'll eat me alive. But it sounds interesting. So I tried it. It was actually a few years after he first invited me that I finally said, yes, I'll go down and spend a summer in prison. And so I went. The prison program is designed to give a college degree, just like the one you're getting here at SLU, to inmates to give them a better chance at having a good, productive life once they leave prison. Most people who are in prison, even if they have good intentions, even if they feel like they're totally rehabilitated, which is rare, they usually can't get a good job. Many of them fall back into the same patterns, and before you know it, they're back in jail. Education in a prison system is designed to get them to break that cycle, to break recidivism. All right. So on a hot June day, I think it was a Monday morning, I drove an hour down to Bonne, Terre, Missouri, parked in this nondescript parking lot, walked inside the front door of the prison. They let you do that. You can walk into a prison. You won't get very far. You'll get the front desk like I did. I signed in, and then it was hard after that point to get into the rest of the prison. Breaking out of prison is very difficult, I'm told. You can't break into prison either. It's also extremely difficult. Even when you follow all the protocol, they might still leave you out. So I go to the first door. I went through a metal detector. I could not bring my cell phone inside. I could not bring more than $50. I could not bring any coins, or I think I could bring my car keys, but no more keys than that. Very limited. I could wear a belt, but not much more than something like that. I go through the metal detector. Then there's this large mechanized heavy-duty door. And I have to wait for someone on the other side to press the magic button, bzzz, and then you can walk through. I walk through that door. Then I come to this long corridor with kind of a mission control off to the side with like 10 security guards in there. And I have to take 2 different forms of ID, press it up against the sensor for both. Then I take my finger, I think it was my middle finger, press it against the fingerprint sensor, which is a digital sensor. Then my image shows up on their computer screen, and they're looking at the screen, and they look through the glass at me, and I have to hold up another ID to make sure it really is me. And then they finally give me the nod, and they let me go through another heavy mechanized door, which I have to wait to be buzzed through. Okay, I open up this door. Now I'm outside again. The prison complex has multiple buildings on its campus. So I have barbed wire as far as the eye can see and as high as the eye can see all over the place. And there's about 15 or 20 prisoners standing in front of me. They're coming through to go do work outside on the grounds. They also need permission to get through. Again, skinny white guy walking through, a little intimidated by this large group of prisoners. I have to make it all the way down this long sidewalk to yet another heavy-duty mechanized door, where I wait patiently outside until somebody buzzes me in. Then I go through another walkway, another door. They buzz me in. Finally I made it. There's this large open space. It's actually, from like where Renee is sitting there all the way over to the end, about this big. So pretty large. This is the visitor center. Large gathering space where people would meet. You know, for example, if you wanted to visit a prisoner, let's say you're the wife of a prisoner and you want to meet him on a day where you can do so, this is where you do it. There's also vending machines in the back. There's like a high chair if you brought your kid with you. There's a lot of random stuff in the room, sort of a multi-purpose room. There's this, so you guys are going to be the guards over here. There's this large table or console over here with 3 guards at all times watching everything and monitors everywhere. All right, they make me feel fairly safe, but also heavily monitored, and I have to be careful what I say. And then as I look over in the corner over there, I see a lot of tables about this size, but square and teal in color. And my prisoners, students, the incarcerated students, have gathered them all together like this really long board table. This is our classroom. All right, so we're going to gather like this every Monday morning. They put the tables together. There's a portable dry erase board here. I was thrilled. I couldn't believe I got a board to write on. And then they are sitting there. And these men are really large. Not all, but most of them. And I'm walking in here thinking, okay, I can do this. I have taught hundreds of students. I know what I'm doing. And I think that I'm an enlightened individual who's open-minded. I'm not going to prejudge anyone. And I am trying hard not to prejudge them. They're in jail for murder, sexual offenses like child molestation, rape, burglary, theft, identity theft. I mean, you name it, that's what they're in for. And they are the sweetest, nicest looking men I have ever seen. A lot of what I'm going to tell you here is about breaking down stereotypes. As much as I tried not to stereotype them, I mean, certain triggers start going off. You can't help it. I come in, I sort of set up. Thankfully, I had a teaching assistant. One of the prisoners was my TA. Yeah, I know, it was crazy. He went through the same class before about 2-3 years ago, and he... Thank you. Anybody? And he was going to help me set up and do some grading and just help me with a lot of practical things. He was invaluable. Jim was his name. He also helped ease me into this transition of what have I gotten into here. I thought I'd start with introductions. So we go around the table. Introductions took a while. They were really happy to talk and to share. I told them who I was. I definitely told them about Stanley. I didn't tell them my age. I made them guess. Just like if you ask me my age, I always make you guess first just to see. It turns out they were about the same age as I was, actually. I think I was early 30s at the time, and they were mostly like late 20s to like late 30s. A few were old enough to be my dad, but not much more. Okay, so I introduce myself, and then we go around the table. I think some of them were really struck just by that move, because in prison, you don't matter. You are what's called an offender. I actually brought my offender rule book with me today. So when you go to prison, you're given an offender rule book. All the things you cannot do, and it specifies the penalties. Many of them are felonies if you commit a crime or do anything wrong in prison. You do not have a name. You have a number on your jumpsuit or your t-shirt. And you're known by the number as an offender generally, or more likely the crime you committed. That's what you're equated with. I asked them, I didn't care what their crime was. I found out later, you can actually search through the database to find out specifically. So for my book project, I needed to know. And that's the only reason I actually looked to see specifics. Otherwise, I didn't care. It was the past. I wanted to know them, who they were, without that sort of baggage. So we went around the room, and I was surprised. I thought here I was going to come in with information from the outside. I was going to tell them, like, who won the Cardinals game the day before. They knew. They knew that Yadier Molina was ejected in the middle of the game for no good reason, I might add. They already knew that. They knew the Miami Heat were playing in the finals yet again. They had interests and tastes and hobbies, some of which they practiced in prison. Who was I to think that they just had this boring life and had no other personality or dimension? Some of them played music. One guy actually was a jazz musician before he was incarcerated, and he continues to play and write music while in prison. Another guy was a drummer. They sort of have makeshift instruments. Rick used to say, when they would get together for their jam sessions, he liked to say, when I'm playing music, I'm not here. Like, I'm in another world. I'm not in jail anymore. I feel like I'm transcended into another place. They told me all sorts of other interesting things, too, about themselves. What else do we got here? I mean, they impressed me with all the things that they've done in their lives. One of them met the Pope. How random is that? Catholic theologian that I am, I've never met the Pope. This guy had been in the Navy and traveled all throughout the world. I forget which Pope. It might have been Paul VI, so that far back. Before all of our time, I think. Another guy described finding God in nature. Their theological awareness was also very astute. One guy described how he and his dad used to travel on a John boat in the rivers of southern Missouri, and how they would find God in nature in that experience. Another one, he actually went to Mizzou for a little while. He was able to tell me about Hindu and Buddhist philosophy or theology. He was very conversant on a lot of philosophical concepts that, again, didn't expect in a prison setting. Somebody was talking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. There's a quiz at the end of this talk, by the way. Do you guys know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer is? All right, famous German theologian who tried to kill Hitler. He was caught and killed for doing it. He's most famous for his letters from prison, which we read in my prison course, and their perspective was really fascinating. But they had heard of and read, some of them, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Like, if you go talk to the grad students in our program, half of them are like, who? Don't do that, by the way. Don't expose their ignorance. And just incredible stuff. These 19 men that I taught were some of the best students I have ever had. No offense. A lot of you guys are great students too. You guys have busy lives, and I recognize too that when I teach you, I hope I have your undivided attention, but I also know you're tired. You can't always do the homework for my class, even though if there's a quiz that day, I know. You have a lot on your plate. These guys, a lot of monotony. They sit around. They have nothing really to occupy their time. We come into their prison, we give them stuff to read. Can I have more, please? They actually ask for more. They do all the homework. And when they show up for class, they have lots of notes and questions, and we only cover maybe 3/4 of the material on any given day. It was incredible to have that kind of engagement in class. They also helped me. I've read the Bible for years. I can read it in multiple languages, but they helped me see certain passages in a new light. Some of you are learning about the Babylonian captivity right now in class, when the Israelites were taken captive into another nation. One of the prisoners who knew the Bible like the back of his hand, he was able to help me see what captivity really means through his own captivity. What it means to have no access to family, friends, your old life, what it means for someone else to dictate the way you live, to be truly trapped. Again, I couldn't really see that on my own. Oh, there was so much more. And then they were inspiring. A lot of them started a tutoring class for fellow prisoners. GED tutoring. So if you're in prison, they do have classes to help you at least get your GED. And if you have a GED or high school degree, you might have access to a little more education, but usually not. My prisoner students, they were helping other students, other prisoners learn. They would go tell other prisoners, you know what we learned in class today? And they would disseminate information and knowledge. So they would share it. Again, incredible. They even started an alliance with you. They started something called the Inside-Outside Alliance. They even have a journal that they publish. The purpose of this is to show people on the outside that they're human beings with thoughts, opinions, viewpoints that are valuable. Again, I'll tell you more about how to learn about the SLU prison program at the end here. Just incredible. A few other things, and then I'll go to the Holy Land with you. Those prisoners I taught were serving sentences of at least 10 years. Some of them longer. I think the longest sentence was 30 or 40. Those two guys will probably never see the light of day again. The rest probably will. Many of them were married before they went to jail, or before they went to prison. Some of them were still married in prison. I could not believe this. Years. Some of their loved ones and spouses moved down to Bonne, Terre. Many of them are from the St. Louis area. Could you imagine? So if you're from southern Missouri or a smaller town, no offense. Could you imagine living in St. Louis your whole life and then a loved one goes to prison and you decide to pack up everything and move to a town of a few thousand people in a very white part of the state? And many of the people in jail, they were actually white and black. But many of the St. Louisans were black who were down there. Didn't care. Several of them still wore wedding rings in prison. Some of them still considered their duty as a father paramount. They got to see their son once in a while or a daughter when they came in for visitations. They still gave them counsel and advice. That's hard when you're wearing a white t-shirt with a number on it and a jumpsuit like everyone else there. The last thing I'll say, obviously, the spiritual component of this is to not judge a book by its cover. I tried my hardest not to come in with prejudgments, and I can't help it. I'm human. And they help me see that they are in many ways like you and me. Similar interests. Okay, many of them committed crimes that hopefully we aren't going to commit, but there isn't that much else that separates us. And yet we demonize them. They're behind bars. I went in prison to find out that there are a lot of people in there, a lot of good people in there who have a lot to teach me. Okay. Do I have enough time to talk about the Holy Land? Okay, I'm going to do it anyway. This will be a little briefer. I felt like a hypocrite talking about Israel for years, and I never actually set foot on Israelite ground. So I got my chance to do an archaeological dig in 2014. In the summer. I picked the worst summer to go. If you remember, that was when, how did it start? A Palestinian teenager got killed or a Jewish teenager? One of them got killed, and then there were sort of like outbursts of violence back and forth, just like it's going on right now again. And it kept escalating. And I'm like, when's my flight going to get there? Could you guys hold off, please, until I'm done? Like past July? No. So I go to the Holy Land to dig dirt and to learn about the Bible and Jesus, and I did. And I also found myself in the middle of a war. Both were positive experiences, even though they were both arduous and one really scary. All right, so here's how I got there. Okay, the hardest part of getting to Israel was getting from St. Louis to Chicago. I sat on the tarmac for 3 freaking hours. You can delete freaking, by the way, out of the video. Sat on the tarmac for 3 hours while we're waiting for the rain in Chicago to stop. 3 hours. I get to Chicago. I have a transfer, of course, and it's O'Hare, I think. And I barely made my connecting flight to Amman, Jordan, just in time. If I miss that one, I'm really screwed. So I make it to that flight, land in Jordan. So we fly over Israel, land in Jordan, and then I got to go take a short hop back to Israel. Barely made that flight. They were lining up on the tarmac to get in the plane as I got there. Whew, made it. Okay. I land in Israel. It's like 10 o'clock at night. I'm in a country I've never been to before. And I don't know modern Hebrew. I know ancient Hebrew, which is of no help at this point. Yeah. All right, again, venture outside your comfort zone, take risks. I'm here, I made it. You know how the story turns out. I go to the machine to exchange currency so I can hop on the train. I'm like, how many shekels do I need? I don't know, what's the currency rate here? Okay. I get the money I need. I get on the train, making sure it's going in the right direction. All right, I catch the last possible train. And I start heading north, waiting for a Spanish woman who teaches in the Madrid campus to come find me at the train stop closest to where we're staying. So this random Spanish woman I've never met before in my life, I've only conversed with by email. Wonderful woman, by the way. If you ever go study in SLU Madrid, take a class with Dr. Asnar. She's wonderful, right? Thank you. I go there, she finds me miraculously. We hit so many roadblocks on the way back. We make it back to home base. I get into bed after midnight, and it's a 4 o'clock morning, by the way, 4 o'clock start to go dig dirt. Kind of brutal. A lot of jet lag right now. I don't care. Best part though, the guy whose room I was sharing it with, he looks like Jesus. It freaked me out, but it was so cool. He had glasses, so that was the only difference. But otherwise, it's like he was a Spanish Jesus. Here I fly across the world to go dig dirt in Israel, and I happen to run into Jesus. It was great. In fact, I share a room with Jesus for a couple weeks. It was wonderful. Okay, so during the 2 weeks, my day job was getting up at 4 in the morning, go dig dirt for 8 hours, see what you could find. I found a lot of cool stuff. I brought a replica of one kind of thing I found, actually. This is a modern replica of an ancient oil lamp. And so when you use lamps in antiquity, you put oil there, the wick sticks out here, and you light it, and this is your source of light. Maybe a little heat too. But they're really simple. I found a 9th or 10th century BC oil lamp when I was digging. That was my claim to fame for the dig. We found other stuff like a pottery kiln. One of my teammates here found an idol. We have her head. We didn't find the rest of her, but that was really amazing. We found some other stuff I'm not at liberty to say because it hasn't been published yet, but a lot of neat stuff. That was my day job. On the weekends, we went out to go see the sites, the famous sites. So I went back in time. This was one of my favorite parts of my trip. Despite the fact that it was years and centuries of history buried underground, to go and see Megiddo, this large city with its chambered gates. So imagine like a medieval castle, you know how they have like that drawbridge in the gate? Israel had better gates. You had these chambered gates where when you walk into a city, it takes you maybe like 100 feet to get inside. And they have vendors and judges off on the side so you can like do commerce or justice over here. I walked through a water tunnel. Thankfully, there was a bridge, so I didn't get wet. But again, I was like going through Israelite culture I'd only read about in books. The best part, though, was going to Nazareth, hometown of Jesus. When we went to Nazareth, they have a village there that recreates what life was like in Jesus' day. So they had a donkey when we got there. The first display was a guy who would take a donkey with kind of like this threshing instrument to thresh the wheat. It was laborious. I felt bad for the donkey. But basically he just walks around in a circle, dragging this metal instrument around so that you can get wheat for food. Again, tough life. We saw a woman making textiles by hand. We saw this little synagogue. I imagine Jesus teaching in synagogues, and they're always sort of regal and august, but in reality, they were small and quaint, not very sophisticated. We found a tomb. It was an artificial tomb. My roommate Jesus went in the tomb. We have pictures of him coming out of the tomb. It was hilarious. He loved it. Great things to see, but what I was struck with most when we went to Nazareth was how humble Jesus' origins actually were. It's small. Are any of you here from a town of 500 people or less? Kyle, how big was the town you're from? 2,000, okay. You're a bigger town than what Jesus had. But you have a better appreciation for what Jesus went through than I do. I grew up in a city with 2.5 million people in the metro area. Tiny town. And this one really shocked me. When we went on a tour of Nazareth, we were told that Jesus lived in a cave. Not literally. They build their houses into the sides of caves. They provided some shelter and some protection against the elements. Don't think of caveman Jesus when you read the Gospels, but don't think of Jesus living in sort of like this nice house. It's only one story, but they have walls and all this stuff. He probably lived in a shanty town. Really humble. Oh, I forgot about the war part. Yeah. Okay. Other Jesus stuff too. I also got to dip my toe in the Jordan River, which was neat, and I got to swim in the Sea of Galilee for a while. That was pretty cool. When I hear the Sermon on the Mount now, I'm envisioning the Sea of Galilee and what it looked like. By the way, if you think St. Louis summers are rough, Galilee is the exact same. Hot and humid. I feel kinship with Jesus, right? When we're suffering the summer, so did he when he was growing up. Rough. War. I was there a few days, and then we always had to leave our window open because we had no air conditioning, and Israel gets pretty warm in the summer. And one of the nights, I'm trying to sleep in bed, Jesus across the way, right? I hear this loud booming noise. It's a jet fighter flying overhead. The air base from which Israeli fighter jets would leave to go bomb the Gaza Strip was just a few kilometers north of our camp in northern Israel. After a while, we got used to the noise of fighter jets every 15 minutes flying overhead to go kill some Palestinians. It was disturbing. And it was also disturbing that we got used to it. A few of us here might remember 9/11. Do you remember what it was like looking at airplanes flying through the sky right after 9/11? Wondering, what is that? And then, okay, I need to calm down, it's just a plane. That's the same feeling I had every time we heard something during the day, we'd all of a sudden look up, what's going on? And the Israelis are like, calm down, because they're used to it. They are accustomed to a life where war is almost a daily reality. I went to Israel. I told you about my roommate Jesus. I was there with Spaniards, Ecuadorians. I met Canadians. I met people from Wisconsin who happened to be there in Israel. I met Palestinians. I met Israelis. I got to talk to lots of different people while I was there. And I was struck with how the Israelis took it all in. One of our co-archaeologists was named Shalom. He had a great name. And in Israel, you also greet people with shalom. So every morning I'd always say, shalom, shalom. And he was a good sport about it. He probably heard that his whole life. It was great. This man served in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Most Israelis have served in war or some sort of combat. We're lucky. After the Vietnam era, for the most part, we're kind of immune to a lot of combat. But they, again, all of them have to do compulsory service. As violence broke out with the West Bank, his son, one of his sons, was being called up as a reservist to go handle the violence in the West Bank, which is where it was the most volatile. And he spoke matter-of-factly about it, like this is just our way of life. That struck me. I thought, I am so lucky in my own country not to have to deal with war on a regular basis. Another thing that was kind of cool, sticking with the war. The American embassy closed while we were there. The airport in Tel Aviv closed. You can imagine how scared those of us who were American were at the time. How are we going to get out of here? We kept emailing our families, it's fine, nothing's wrong here. Don't tell my parents I said that, by the way. We drove through Nazareth for dinner one evening, and we had to, our caravan of minivans, had to make its way around burning trash in the middle of the street because the palace, well, they're Arab Israelis in Nazareth. They were protesting a lot of what was going on. And we just stopped by and had some falafel and shawarma without any problem from some Arab Israelis while these protests are going on. It was also the last day of Ramadan, so fireworks are constantly going off, and it's really scaring us. Like, was that a firework or a gunshot? Firework, okay. Again, regular for them, so foreign to us. Just a few other things. I got to experience communism. That was kind of neat. Does anyone know what a kibbutz is? Have you heard of a kibbutz? T, you've heard of one? Have you been to a kibbutz? But you've heard of one, okay. I spent the summer on a kibbutz. A kibbutz is like Israel's version of socialism. Whatever you think about communism, just sort of leave it aside. They all live together in community. There's no private property. So think of like, if it's about the size of SLU's campus. Think of SLU's campus, and you just have houses just randomly throughout. A common kitchen area, a big cafeteria where we had all our meals together. It was really neat. It was also odd. So when you get married on a kibbutz, everyone's invited. So I randomly walked through a wedding ceremony once. I didn't know it at the time. I was like, oh, cool, they got married. There are no private dogs, I don't think. Dogs just roam around. They're not feral dogs, they're good dogs. But you're just like, you're kicking a soccer ball around, all of a sudden there's a dog joining you. Oh, it's one of the kibbutz dogs. Again, we got to find out about this communal life, sharing everything together. And they were so friendly. Again, I told you I had no Hebrew. I learned, I think, 3 new words in Hebrew while I was there. So anytime I would go through the cafeteria, I'd get food, I'd say, Toda, which is thank you in Hebrew. And they say, Bavakesha, you're welcome. Even though my accent was terrible, they would just humor me. I learned a lot about the Israeli way of life, living in war. I learned a lot about Jesus' life, and a lot of things I've already forgotten, and I'm sorry I couldn't remember as much to tell you today. I would not have experienced any of these things if I succumbed to the typical attitude a lot of us have when we think of something different and foreign and potentially dangerous. I grew up in South St. Louis. When I was a kid, you did not go to North St. Louis. Don't tell my parents this, but I've been to North St. Louis many times. It's okay. I went to a war zone. Please do not purposely go to a war zone. But just because there's a place where there might be like this hint of violence or there's a reputation, don't let that deter you, because you can learn a lot of valuable things from people of different walks of life. We're about 1 year from the 1-year anniversary of the announcement of the police officer from Ferguson not being indicted, and you remember the breakout of violence then. Some of you actually were in my class, I think, at the time. I was appalled at how many students and parents of students were freaking out. They were completely hysterical. What, my kid can't go to class today to turn her paper in? No, she's got to come home right away. It's like, I think we're going to be all right. You know what? We were. That's not to say that there wasn't some problems, some tension, and some violence. I'm not telling you to go into the middle of an organized revolt or where there are people shooting guns. That would be bad. But don't succumb to the problem that a lot of us do in suburbia, where, well, I don't know, that sounds dangerous, that's not for me. Get rid of these ridiculous barriers that we set up in our minds. There is so much of life that you can see. I went into a war zone, didn't know it at the time, and I learned so much, and I went into a prison, and I'm fine. Nothing happened to me. In fact, I grew a lot as a result. So don't judge a book by its cover, and please meet people of all stripes. You never know what you're going to learn. Would you like to learn more about the SLU prison program? Google it. SLU prison program. We have a website. You can learn more about it. The dig that I went on actually is done about every other summer. Dr. Osnar just had a child, so it might be a while before she does it again. But if you're still in college and you'd like to do it, feel free to take part in an archaeological dig one summer in Israel. It's a lot of work, but it's also very rewarding at the same time. Thank you so much for your rapt attention.
much. Does anybody have any questions?
By the way, there's lots of dessert and coffee and hot chocolate. Please help yourself. If you don't, I'm eating all of it. Was there a hand over here?
Yeah, it's a hand right back there in the blue jacket.
Nope. That was a fake one. Carly.
What do you think the prisoners got out of your class?
Dr. Miller, can you restate the question?
Yeah. So the question was, what did the prisoners get out of my class? That's a good question. The best way to answer, also Jeff here, he referred to a book I'm writing on the prisoners' experience of evil and answering the problem of evil. They wrote some amazing essays. Some of them were okay, some were pretty good, some were outstanding. I mean, I don't tear up too much, but one of them really got me. I started choking up. I'm not going to tell you what that one is. I'll let you read it. I really do hope this book sees the light of day. I have an agent who's trying to publish it right now, and a lot of publishers are like, sounds good, but we don't think anyone will be interested in what prisoners have to say. Hopefully she'll find one person who thinks they're all wrong. But if you'd like to see a sample, I brought their essays with me. What did they learn? I think they learned to think more critically about religion. A lot of them have a come to Jesus moment when they go to prison. Some of them are born again. I had some of those students. But I had one of my philosopher student, the brightest in the bunch. He said, you know what, you got kind of like an atypical group because most of us are agnostic or atheist. Most people in prison actually go the other end. And I think a lot of them had a more open attitude toward religion and organized religion, even though they feel cut off from it. I had at least one Catholic student there. I didn't expect that either. And he said, I mean, he has no access to the Mass or rituals. They have like a simple non-denominational Protestant kind of chapel and a chaplain, but they don't have services for anyone other than non-denominational Protestants. So he really felt removed. But I think a lot of them had like a healthier attitude toward the Bible, religion, and seeing that they could find some profit from it. Selfishly, I kept thinking about what I learned. But I think if you read their essays, you'll see a lot of their thought-provoking thoughts on evil and why evil happens and how there can still be a God. Good question. Natalie, way in the back. Okay, so what was the curriculum I taught to the students? It was a little like your class, Theo 1000, except I changed quite a bit. We didn't talk about Vatican II. That wasn't really of interest to them. Introduction to the Bible, ethics. I had to be a little delicate with the examples I picked there, and I stayed away from sexual topics as much as possible for obvious reasons. It would have been, I think, a little too hard on some of them. We spent a whole day, so it was 8 days, 4-hour classes. That does sound like prison, doesn't it? They loved it. I loved it too, but they were long days. We spent a whole week on the Christian experience of prison. Martin Luther King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail, a classic. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Letters from Prison. Dorothy Day, her autobiography when she was in prison. Paul, St. Paul, his letter to Philemon from prison. A few other things. So that was one way in which the curriculum was a little different. The last class, I let them do individual presentations. What did you learn in this class? What do you want to share? It was like a TED Talk in a way, except shorter. Some of them were terrified. They did not like public speaking at all, but some of them relished it. I had to okay, sit down. But they had some great things there too. The Babylonian captivity one I mentioned about the guy helping me see what it's like to be a captive, that was one of the oral presentations. T.
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing more about your experience being a Christian in Israel while Israel is oppressing Palestine.
Yeah, okay, so the question is, my experience as a Christian while the state of Israel is oppressing the Palestinians. Okay. Well, I could not be struck with the ironic perversity of being in the homeland of Jesus, going to Nazareth. Nazareth is a great example of the conflict. I've been talking about Israelis and Palestinians. Palestinians live in areas considered Palestine, the Gaza Strip on the coast and the West Bank. in east of Jerusalem. It's called the West Bank because it's west of Jordan, which is where many of the Palestinians moved after the Israelis took their land. A lot of Arabs still live in other cities in Israel, within the boundaries of Israel. They're not called Palestinians, they're called Arab Israelis because they have Israeli citizenship. But ethnically, religiously, and all that, they are Arab, and therefore connected to the Palestinian brothers and sisters. As the Jewish state grew and took over more and more land, they realized that the Arabs were reproducing at a much higher rate. And this is a huge problem for the Jewish state of Israel now. Because in a few decades, the Arabs will greatly outnumber the Jewish settlers there because they're reproducing far greater. So what many of the Jewish cities have done, Nazareth, there's an upper Nazareth and a lower Nazareth. All these Arabs living in Nazareth, okay, Jews, we want you to go live in Nazareth, but we'll call that upper Nazareth. And that's the one we really mean. It's like a second-class society within the same city. I mean, what I really wanted to do was just like join hands with the Palestinians and say, yeah, let's get rid of the settlements in the West Bank for starters. Let's find a peaceable two-state solution. I have all these answers from my enlightened Western point of view, right? I would have probably been thrown in jail, my visa revoked. I mean, I would have failed miserably. The best thing I could do is to talk to them and to listen to them. I also talked to Israelis. Any of you Americans ever unhappy with what your government does? Okay? Doesn't matter if you're unhappy now or you're unhappy if it's the other party in the White House. There's going to be times where we're unhappy. There were a lot of Israelis who were unhappy with what's been going on between Israel and Palestine. And I talked to them. Shalom, for example, a veteran of war. He's a peacenik. And what he said is, I don't care what we do as long as it brings about peace. That's all I want. A lot of Israelis feel that way. So I tried to listen as opposed to like, I know what's best here. But I was very sympathetic to the Palestinians, and a lot of Jews are too. Since this is a bit political, and obviously T is going to get me down that road. Thank you, T. I wrote an op-ed in the Post-Dispatch, I think it was last September, and you can look it up, it's still there. My experience there and my criticism of the Israeli government. I do not condone the Hamas militants who were shooting bombs at us. To be perfectly blunt, I was grateful for American tax dollars shipped over to Israel to make sure that we were protected. I benefited from that. At the same time, what the Israeli government is doing is not sustainable, it's not peaceful. You can read my op-ed in the Post-Dispatch. You can Google it. It's Violence in Israel, A View from the Ground. You get more of my opinion on that one. Good question. There was a hand over here.
Yeah. With the prison program, is there anything we can do for under 21?
Great question. If you're an undergraduate student under 21, can you do anything for the prison program? Probably not. This is very unfortunate. I have actually been banned from the prison. I left this out of the talk because I couldn't get my tuberculosis test updated at the time they wanted me to. Any minor little violation of a rule, done, gone, over. Many of my students were thrown into solitary confinement while I taught them. It's called ADSEG, administrative segregation. It's still solitary. Because of the most minor offenses. We think that you're guilty of something because someone accused you of something, you're going into ADSEG. We'll have an investigation. 3 weeks later, I get to see one of my students who was totally innocent. This is the culture down there, and it's true of most prisons. You're guilty until proven innocent. For you guys, there's the problem of being minors in some cases or not of age, and some of them don't want us there. When I went through all the different levels of security and when I'm teaching the students, some of those guards thought I was this hippie from the big city, from St. Louis. What are you doing down here? These offenders, they deserve to rot and die. That's the mentality. And just our own position there as a prison program is, I think, tenuous because of that. We're trying to help out bad people is what they're thinking. Please go to the SLU prison program website because there certainly are answers to your question about what you can do as a college student. Sadly, it's not much, but hopefully we can find ways to enable you. Just evangelizing, getting the word out about the prison program and helping change minds and hearts about prisoners and saying, yeah, they've done wrong, What's the gospel message about? Second chances, right? Jesus is all about associating with people who deserve a second chance, right? That's probably the best thing you can do, is just raise awareness. Were there other questions that you have? There's a hand over here. Yes, go ahead.
I wasn't here for the whole talk, but did you have to cross the border between Israel and like the West Bank or Palestine?
Okay, so the question was, did I cross the border between Israel and Palestine, or Jordan? I flew over it, but no. I never got that close. On our visit to Israel, we stayed in the north for the most part. Much of the violence was in the south near the Gaza Strip. We wanted to go to Jerusalem and Jericho during my stay, but we couldn't because of the violence, so I never got to see the Dead Sea. Next time, still on my bucket list. I did when I flew back to the States. I went back to Jordan, and the next flight was like 12 hours, so I stayed overnight in Amman, Jordan. And I was a little worried that when they stamped my passport with a Jordanian visa on it, that when I got to Chicago, they weren't going to let me through, or they're going to do like a full body search or something. No, it was fine. I was okay. I slept on a bed in a Jordanian hotel, and it was really lovely. The best sleep I had in 2 weeks. I didn't have Jesus with me that time, but I had a nice bed. It was pretty comfy. If I were to go back, I'd be careful about crossing borders, just because I'm worried about getting back. I want to, but there's only so much I can do before I get thrown in jail myself. I will happily hang around for a little longer if you want to ask more questions. Again, get some dessert, and thank you again all for coming tonight.